So I'm gonna introduce you guys first, and then I'm just gonna ask you the questions I sent. And I think most of us are composers, so it'll be chill. So Joshua Tomlinson, is originally from the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And Joshua Tomlinson is a composer, sound designer, and educator specializing in electroacoustic music and technology. Joshua completed his DMA in composition at the University of Oklahoma in 2019. He's currently instructor and area coordinator of music technology at the University of North Florida. His compositions have been performed at various conferences and festivals throughout the world, including Australia, Europe, South America, and the United States. He's looking forward to returning to England this fall to perform his electroacoustic theater piece, A Short Story, at De Montfort University. I don't know if I said that right. Joshua serves on the steering committee of the New York City Electroacoustic Music Festival and has participated as a composer and assistant technical director since 2012. He is also the founder and director of the Jacksonville Electroacoustic Music Festival. He and his wife Hannah share their Jacksonville home with a lemon tree and 4 cats. He's happy to share that their garden, but not their cat population, is expanding. Nice. I'm gonna introduce Bradley for us. So Bradley Green is a composer, theorist, and educator based in Washington, D.C. His music has been programmed at multiple musical festivals and conferences, and he is an active theorist and pedagogue who has presented and published on the topics of music composition and theory, pedagogy, and the open form works of composer Earl Brown. Additionally, he's a founding member of the District New Music Coalition, an organizing of musicians that aim to promote the performance and appreciation of contemporary music within the Washington, D.C. metro area. Bradley earned his DMA in music composition from the University of Maryland in 2017 and has since then served as both full and part-time faculty at numerous universities, including American University, the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and the University of the District of Columbia. Currently, he is the academic advisor for the College of Nursing and Allied Health Sciences at Howard University in Washington, D.C. Nice. Got that out of the way. So now we can talk a little more informally. I just wanted you guys to just briefly say what you do, like, I don't know, like 45 seconds of, whatever your bio didn't cover in a more informal, like, yeah, whatever you want to say. And then I'll ask the first question. Yeah. Bradley,
I'd like to go first.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, crap.
Okay, I'll go first. No, it's fine. Well, you said most of it. I graduated in 2017, and since then I was a professor at various universities for about 5 years. Was full-time at American University for a while, but I'm coming from this from a slightly different perspective, I think, than Joshua is, because I'm actually not in a music field right now. I'm actually in a higher education field, academic advising at Howard University. And there's lots and lots of reasons for that I can go into if need be. But it does have to do in some ways with the field of music once you get out of your doctorate and what it's like when you get out, because it is an interesting time in those few years after your PhD or DMA. But right now, what I'm doing is advising students, which I had been doing for all those 5 years while I was teaching anyways. It was actually the reason why I went into advising was that whenever I was teaching, I was always very student focused and working with students. In fact, my first degree is in music education. So that basically was an easy lateral entry for me into a completely different field at the end of last year. So I've been in this new position for only about a month now. So that's me in a nutshell.
Nice. Okay, great. Yeah, we're gonna get deeper into those. That's really good. Josh, can you just let me know briefly what you're up to?
Yeah, sure. First of all, congrats on the positions, and I didn't realize it was so new. So, yeah, I'm down at University of North Florida in Jacksonville. So my official title is instructor and area coordinator. The instructor part is teaching. I teach mostly, so we offer practical technology courses and also creative technology courses. So I teach a little bit of both of those. The area coordinator part is doing more administrative work for the music technology program, which is pretty new at UNF. As a matter of fact, it's the youngest program there. So more the paperwork side is that. So teaching and administrative work.
Okay, cool. Nice. So what do you like about your job, and what in your job can be a difficult challenge? I'll stay with Josh. We'll do like we'll just do two things for each person and switch. Yeah.
I I pretty much like the job as far as I don't know if there's like any one favorite thing. I like teaching very much, and I like the administrative work more than maybe I thought I would have. Challenges can be that really any time that you want to make changes, and this probably goes across the board, but especially in academia, I feel anytime you want to make changes that affect other people, it can be extremely difficult and tedious. Changes that I want to make that only affect me, I can actually, even then, it can take up to a year just for the paperwork to get through. But you know, anytime, the more integrated your program is with other programs, the slower change can be, and that can be difficult. So navigating those relationships and all of that is it's a challenge. But yeah, so I mean the teaching is good, but the administrative part and navigating those relationships can be a real challenge.
Yeah, I think a lot of the talks people have said that the teaching is wonderful. It's awesome to work with students, but yeah, in academia, it's just hard to change things sometimes. Bradley, can you tell me a little bit? How do you like your job? What can be? I guess you just started a new job, so
Yeah, I can pepper this in as like my job now, and also being an adjunct for 5 years, because
yeah,
I
sure.
think I think that's an important thing to talk about. So my current job now, I kind of echo what Joshua was saying. Is, you know, working with students is always the highlight. It's what I've always been. It's always what I've always wanted to do since I first started in this field. So just being able to work with students is great. Most of my job right now is administrative tasks, which I actually kind of like Joshua liked more than I thought I would. And yeah, academia moves slow. It moves at a snail's pace because I don't know if you know this, but colleges are complicated, incredibly complicated. There's a reason why they offer degrees in higher education. But in terms of like what I don't like about it, I'm gonna because I've been in this job for so short amount of time, I'll look to my past 5 years as being an adjunct and a visiting professor, is the instability. Because I was an adjunct at my peak at 3 universities that span between Washington D.C. and Baltimore, and that was what I had to do because, just to be clear, getting a full-time position right when you get out of your college degree is an exception, not a rule. It's very, very unlikely. You're more than likely going to be an adjunct for quite some time, and you just kind of have to do those metrics in your head of what you're willing, like how long you're willing to do it versus when you're willing to say, okay, you know, I've done my due diligence, let me move on. It just depends on it's a person-to-person thing. And for me, I've made that decision this year because I had a steady teaching gig at 3 universities, but that's 3 part-time universities. You're not getting paid nearly as well. You don't get benefits. You're driving a lot, except during COVID, which was you're on Zoom a lot, which, you know, everyone's doing now anyways. So that's the hardest thing when you first get out in those kind of positions, is just it's a year-to-year thing in terms of when your contract get renewed. And if they like you, you'll get it renewed. But sometimes, you know, they might just make budget cuts, and you might, you know, lose all of your teaching for next year just because of that. I know that happened at I won't say where, but somewhere nearby me. I'm in Washington D.C. There's like 1,000 universities here, so you can take a guess. Where they literally, when COVID happened, they cut all of their adjunct faculty. So a bunch of my friends just lost all of their income for an entire year. So things like that when it comes to being an adjunct is the thing I disliked about it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
I'll echo what Bradley has said, because I consider myself very fortunate to have the gig I currently do. Before I did it, I was adjuncting like he was. I was in Oklahoma at the time, and I was all over the city. I was at 3 different schools, and I actually even had a school that I ended up quitting because it was a 3 credit hour class that they wanted to cut down to a 1 credit hour class, but they still wanted me to teach it like a 3 credit hour class. So it's still
Yeah, so
required.
basically pay you for 1 credit hour and that. Yep.
Right. So I still had to show up Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but it was kind of crazy. So it's I will say adjuncting is extremely important for building your resume and your CV and all that, but it can often feel like a very thankless job.
Yeah, that's absolutely true what you said in terms of like building a resume. Because I mean, especially if you're coming out of your doctoral degree with no teaching experience, they're going to want to, make sure that you have teaching experience. And also, there's the whole idea of like, it's all about who you know. And that there is some truth to that, especially when it comes to adjuncting, just getting to know your the faculties at your various universities. That's why I mentioned that it's kind of a person to person thing. Because like someone like me, could have continued on being an adjunct. But basically the metrics in my head, like there's lots of reasons for it, not just, not just being an adjunct, where I was finally like, okay, now's the time. And for every person, it's going to be different, but you're going to be doing some adjuncting when you get done. And my advice would actually be to, if you can, start when you're in school. While you're still a doctoral student, go out and find yourself a community college and teach at.
Yeah, that's a great advice.
Absolutely.
Thank you, guys. I mean, I'm only a year out. I have 1 more year of funding, and sometimes they'll throw a few, like an extra year maybe, but that's uncertain. So yeah, this is great advice for me right now. Yeah, I guess I should say I'm doing a PhD in music composition and theory at the University of Pittsburgh.
And
So
remind me,
what
what is Lorena? What are you studying? I'm sorry.
I'm doing physics and astronomy, so this is interesting for me just because there's certain overlap between different careers, but it does not directly apply.
Right. Well, one thing I would say for you though is, yeah, and you probably already know this, but keeping in mind postdoctoral. I worked with a number of scientists, like I served on committees that yeah, your trajectory is a little bit different. That really in music, once we get past our PhDs or DMAs, the expectation is like that's kind of it. But there are other areas that you can pursue. So definitely.
Yeah, and I believe they publish like postdoc and stuff like that on things like higheredjobs.com and some other places. I've seen them posted there before. And Emerson, out of curiosity, are you adjuncting anywhere currently, or are you teaching at Pitt?
Yeah, I'm teaching at Pitt. But yeah, there's like 5 universities. Well, there's like 8 places I think that I could start looking for adjunct work.
Well, I will say that the way that I was able to get my first gigs, and this is one thing that my professor at University of Maryland, who I love dearly, pushed to me to do, and I think it was just the right choice, was I had some research. This was actually the Earl Brown research that you mentioned in my bio at the very beginning. It was like, just pass it around. I mean, I'm in DC, so there's just like tons of colleges around. Just pass it around the colleges and see, they'll let you present to their students for free. Because I mean, everyone's looking for places to present. So I just emailed all of the heads of the departments and be like, hey, do you want a free presentation on Earl Brown? And they're like, sure. And those were all the schools I ended up working at. I just went over there for an hour presentation. They liked the way that I interacted with the students, and they were like, come back and teach. So that was a really good jumping off point for me, at least.
Yeah.
Great. So we're gonna stick with Bradley. How was your experience? No, or how did you prepare yourself for this role? I guess you can talk about both. The one you currently have, and maybe your adjuncting after your PhD, and then when did you start your jobs?
So that's actually, I mean, it's kind of in tandem, my current position plus my other positions, what I prepared for. Like I mentioned before, my undergraduate was in music education, so I always planned on working with students. I was always very student focused. Don't get me wrong, I am a composer, I'm a musician at heart, but in terms of like a career, students were always the thing I was going to go after, because that's who I enjoyed working with. So one way I prepared for that is I always tried to find myself in teaching positions wherever I was at. So I was teaching during my master's degree, I was teaching during my doctoral degree, and also just working with students in general. That's actually one of the reasons why I was able to get my current position as an academic advisor was because I work with students in other capacities in administrative work. And that's one thing that I'll be completely frank. If you're going for that full-time position, yes, they're looking for people who can teach well, but there's two things they're really looking for. Also, they're looking for, number one, just your scholarly endeavors, your compositions, your publications, things like that. But also, do you have administrative work and like working in other capacities in higher education? So I always try to prepare in that way, which I did in my doctoral programs. And there was another part of your question, and I've blanked it out of my head. What was it?
Oh, it's just when you started these. I guess you kind of already addressed that. Just when you started the job. Yeah.
Timeline. So yeah, I graduated from undergrad. I graduated from my doctoral program. The semester before I graduated, I was already adjuncting at American University, adjuncted there for a year, and they were actually the position that I was able to get the visiting professorship for because they knew me. I'll be completely frank. Had they not known me there, and had they not liked me when I applied for that visiting professorship, they probably would not have hired me because there are hundreds of applicants, and they're trying to find, and there are hundreds of applicants with all of which whom have doctoral degrees, PhDs, or DMAs, or what have you. So basically, because they knew me, because I got in there and I had already taught there for a year, and it just so happenstance that a professor was leaving for a year. They interviewed me. It was that whole interview process that's very infamous amongst academia. We can go into that if you want to at some point.
We will actually, yeah.
We will. Okay, good. Well, we need to warn people. But yeah, I visited there for a year, and then it was pretty much steady adjunct work after that. Nothing else came open visiting wise in the area I was in. At least nothing that I was particularly qualified for. It was because that's one thing that always happens is, like, they'll look for something very specific because they're replacing a very specific person. And then yeah, in my current position, I got there the timeline like a couple months ago because I just happened to apply and they hired me. There was nothing special about me getting this particular position, just because it's much less competitive just to get a academic advisor position.
So now moving to Josh. So yeah, how did you prepare yourself for the role you have during your and after your PhD, and when did you start your job?
Yeah, so a couple of things I did was the first was try to understand what academia is, and like what the job market actually looked like and what they would be looking for. And I did that some just on my own, checking out books. Like there was one called The Professor Is In, and another one that's called, I think The Professor Is In was actually written by someone that was in the humanities, but she wrote it in a way that kind of generally applied. Academic Handbook was another one. And then I even took a course while I was at OU. So just trying to generally understand what they would be looking for, and then try to have that in preparation. Other big things I did was that I was adjuncting the entire time. Well, maybe not the entire time, probably starting my second year of my doctorate. Honestly, even though there were people that were telling me not to, there were people that wanted me to just focus on my studies and all of that. But unfortunately, I've just known too many people that have gotten all the way through their bachelor's, master's, and doctorate with zero teaching experience. And at the end of the day, that's what we're applying for jobs as. Lorena might be an exception. I know in the sciences, you can also just apply to be a researcher, full-time research on a 12-month contract. Still, though, that same principle applies. Like if you're applying for a research position and have zero research experience, that's not going to look very good. So trying to educate myself on what future search committees would be looking for, getting as much teaching experience as I possibly could. And the other thing was I really kind of doubled down on technology. My education is actually in music theory and composition. My doctorate was entirely in composition, but the general trend in music right now is, technology is only becoming more and more part of our education. So I guess I gambled a little bit on that one. A lot of my compositions were actually, sorry, I'm in a coffee shop right now. I don't know if you can hear the coffee being grinded. They grind it fresh here. That's what's important. But a lot of my compositions use technology, so it went hand in hand with what I was doing creatively. But my job right now is mostly music technology. So a part of that I would say is, try and pay attention to what the trends might be in academia in your own fields, right? So trying to stay, at the end of the day, you're trying to convince a search committee that you can bring something to their program. It's not about you. It's not about your art. It's not about your science. It's not about your research. It's not about you. It's about their school, right? Now they have to be interested in your research. They have to be interested in your art. They have to be interested in those things that you're doing. But trying to figure out, well, what are the trends in academia or in this field generally, and how can I fit in there, and how can I provide something for them?
Absolutely. So what's the timeline for when you started these positions? Like, how long did it take you to get to area coordinator? How many years were you adjuncting and things?
So adjuncting in total, or
I don't know. Yeah. What happened after your PhD? Like, I don't know. How many years?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I took a break between my master's and my doctorate. After I finished I did my master's at East Carolina University, and then I actually stayed in Eastern North Carolina, and I adjuncted at 3 community colleges, and kind of drove all over the place. And then after that, I went and started my doctorate in Oklahoma. And then probably my second or third year, I started picking up adjunct positions, mostly at small private religious schools right there in the Oklahoma City area, teaching anything from oral skills, music appreciation, all of that sort of thing. So really did more of jack of all trades. I was very fortunate that after I finished my doctorate, the professor I was studying with went on sabbatical, and he offered to let me teach some of his classes while he went on sabbatical, and I took him up on that. So in addition to all the other places I was adjuncting, I was also teaching part-time at the University of Oklahoma. And then I know we're going to get into the job market more and more, but I applied to a bunch of jobs, probably 40 jobs when I was ABD, and I didn't get a single callback. And then I applied to close to 40 jobs once again, once I finally finished my doctorate. And of those 40, I got 3 interviews. So the short answer to your question is, after I finished my doctorate, there was 1 year, and then this position opened at UNF, and I got it.
Wow. Thank you. Okay. So now we're going to get into like, I think we're sticking with Josh on this one. How was your experience applying to your current position? What was the competition like, or your understanding of that, the expectations, the timeline for like when you applied to get into the next interview and the next interview, and then what was the interview process itself like?
Yeah. So I don't know specific numbers of exactly how many people applied to the job. My understanding is that it was a lot, but I don't have an exact number for you. They did bring in to have on-campus interviews. They brought in 3 people, I think, 3 or 4. All of it's pretty confidential, so I don't know. These are just little tidbits I've picked up
Right.
here and there. The actual interview process was, they contacted me and had a Zoom interview with me. And after that, then I advanced to having an in-person interview where they flew me out to Jacksonville for a few days. And then after that, I went home and waited, and then finally got a phone call from the director. And that's my understanding is kind of the process, is that you're going to go through either a phone interview or a Zoom interview first. And then if you advance past that, then you'll have an in-person interview. The in-person interview is a little bit more exhausting, as you can imagine. The Zoom interview lasted between 30 and 45 minutes, where they just kind of asked me some pretty general questions. The in-person interview was all day. And I've heard of some programs where it even lasts more than one day. They walk you around and like show you the school and, you know, show you a lot of different things, introduce you to a lot of different people. But then you also have to give a presentation of your own. And I had to give two presentations, actually. I had to give a teaching presentation where I had to, I'm basically demonstrating my teaching skills in real time. They have it in a real class with students, but you know, not to make you nervous or anything, but then sitting off to the side is like your whole search committee watching you teach this class. The second presentation, since I'm, you know, since, as I said, I'm DMA composition, my second presentation was on my own music. But still, they have students there that will ask you questions and interact with what you're doing. And, you know, the expectation is that it will still be a, you know, high quality and also an educational experience for the students. And then after that, like I said, I just had to go home and sit home and wait. There was another part of your question, I feel, though. Did that answer it?
I think that was everything, actually, because you talked about the actual interview process itself. Yeah, that was really thorough. Nice. Bradley, straight up to you. So just
Yeah.
yeah. Do you remember?
Yeah, I'm gonna probably answer from the standpoint of the visiting professorship. That's why they didn't hire me. That I got because it was much similar to what Joshua had to go through. Also wanted to echo something Joshua said earlier about about your research being topical to the times. I think that's very, very important, and a lot of schools are looking for that, about what is, you know, what's the hot topic right now that's going on in academia. When I was coming up, one of the big topics was like interdisciplinary music with other skill sets, and then it was technology, and now there's a bunch of different things that it is now, but like knowing your field well enough to know like what is the new, you know, thing people are presenting on everywhere, that's very important. But back to your question, my interview process was very similar, where one thing you asked was like about when you apply to the job, when do you get the callback? So my experience applying to academic positions, like you can apply and then not hear back anything for 4, 5, 6 months, maybe. It can take a long time to hear back, especially if you're applying for a job next academic year in the previous fall, which a lot of places will do. And you might apply in like October and not hear anything back until March. It's very likely. So that's the first thing. Second thing is they will always you'll usually go through a phone or nowadays a Zoom interview as kind of like the first screener. And they'll ask you like you know basic questions just to kind of get to know you a little bit, see if you're a good fit for their program, their specific program there. And then if that works well, then you do the in-person. Much of my in-person was very similar to Joshua's. Maybe the only few differences are when I had to teach in front of a class, but it was during the summer, so I taught in front of the entire theory department a music theory lesson, which was very harrowing, as you can imagine, because who knows better of what questions to ask that will throw you off as a theory department. In fact, I was teaching secondary dominance, and the first question one of them asked was about the 5 of the 4. And I was just like, because he knew exactly what would throw me. So that's one thing I had to do. I also had to give a mock composition lesson to a student. They brought in just a random piece of music from one of their students, and I had to give that lesson in front of the faculty, and also do a presentation on your own music as well. So it's kind of that whole situation. And the only difference really between just kind of maybe a little minutia, like I was just saying, who am I teaching in front of? The only real difference was I also, at the very end of it all, after all that went through, I had to interview with the chair of the department, like individually right after that. And then it was a waiting game to when they called. And for me, they called for that position the day after, I think it was, and to offer me the position. But I mean, it can really be anything. One thing to keep in mind whenever you're dealing with like higher education applications and interview processes is kind of like we were talking about before. When it comes to the complexities of universities, is everything moves at a snail's pace. Because let's say the hiring committee really wants this one particular person, before they can necessarily offer that person the job, they might have to actually send that recommendation to like the dean of the college or like some other higher up to get approval of that specific person and then send it down the pipeline. So you could be sitting there waiting, a week or two for them to offer you the job. And it's not because they're having trouble making the decision, it's that they're waiting to hear back from this other committee so they can then offer you the job. So it's all a very stressful situation. It's stressful in the application and it's stressful in the interview, and it's stressful in the wait afterwards. It's tailor made for stress, and it's just one of those things you get used to. And also, similar to what Joshua said, as I applied to 40, 50 jobs in the entire country. That's one of the things you just apply everywhere. I got most of my stuff from higheredjobs.com. And the fact that Joshua, you said that you got 3 responses 1 year for interviews, that seems like a massive number to me. Like when being like applying to 40 positions and getting 3 interview callbacks, that's huge. So yeah.
I should clarify though, along those lines is that, so I got 3 callbacks. One of the jobs was not teaching. It was to be an audio engineer at a university.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So like I was applying to, job, anything. And that's what I encourage people to do is, apply to jobs that's like anything that you feel like that like even remotely relates to what you do. At the end of the day, we're all trying to get the gig, but even this job at UNF, it related to what I do because it's technology, but the job posting sounded way more like they wanted an audio engineer. Sometimes search committees don't entirely know what they want, until they see your resume and they think, oh, actually what this person's doing is really cool. So yeah, I should have clarified that 2 of the job callbacks were for teaching. 1 was for an audio engineering position. But I love what you said too, Bradley, about the extra process of like the hierarchy, because he's absolutely right. Like it goes from here to here to here to here. It like has to work its way up. So things can take excruciatingly a long time. And yeah, I also had to meet with the director. One piece of advice that I was given going into my interview process was that your interview begins the second you walk off the plane. Maybe you've even heard that, because the person who picked me up from the airport was on my search committee. So everything that you do, say, and wear, I mean, I love how Bradley said it, it's tailor made for stress. Like it's true. It's like this gauntlet of an experience. But if you can put yourself into that mental space of, the second I walk off that plane, my interview starts. So even when they take you out to lunch and you think you're just sitting there shooting the breeze, that's still part of your interview.
Yeah, because they number one, they also want to make sure not only do you fit academically and in your research and just in your general work with music, but also they want to make sure that you're a colleague that they're going to want to be around most of the times of the day. So you're exactly right. They're interviewing you from the very beginning, just to see if you all click together. And I want to kind of highlight something you just said, Joshua, that I think is very important as well. That you mentioned also applying to other types of jobs than just pure teaching stuff. That's actually something that happened to me whenever I decided I was like, maybe I go towards this other thing that's not as music central. I thought to myself, what are my other skill sets? And you realize that generally when you're a doctoral student, especially, you develop all these other skills that's not just music composition. So for me, I knew my skill set was working with students in a higher education capacity. And also my other skill set was I did concerts all the time. I put them on, I did the tech for the concerts, audio, visual, all that stuff. So those are the two jobs that I went for. And it just so happened that, one side yielded results better. So that's one of the quicker, I mean, that's one thing to kind of key in on is, when you're getting these degrees and you're staring at the finish line where it's like, I'm no longer in school, and after this point, there be demons, and what's going to happen. You realize that you have all of these other things that push comes to shove and it comes down to it, and you just need to have like a gig. You can find those things out there, at least in the interim, because you have those experiences. So yeah, getting eclectic experience in a lot of things other than pure music composition is I think a very good thing.
Absolutely. That was great. Yeah, this is exactly what I need to hear. I'm about to do all this stuff. So the next thing is, I think we're sticking with Bradley, I think. What's something you're glad you did during your doctorate, or something in the time after you completed your degree leading to your job now? And what's something you wish maybe you've done differently?
Sure thing. Sorry, can you hear my air conditioner back here? How loud is it? Okay.
Not really loud at all.
Very good. The gate is working then. Something that I'm glad that I did. I told you before that the presentations that I gave at schools nearby, I thought that was the most useful thing that I did because it yielded results. They all offered me a job afterwards. Those are the schools that I worked at. So that's helpful, especially in. I can't speak for every area, but for me, because I was applying to everything under the sun in the United States that would come open. But in the interim, I needed an adjunct job where I'm at, and DC has like just a huge doctoral population because so many of these schools around here give doctorates in music composition. So you have to set yourself apart somehow, and that was the way that I was able to do that, was giving those presentations. So that's the first thing I did. The other thing I did during my time as a doctoral student that I think was really helpful is you develop relationships with the people you're there with, because I still work with them. I started the new music group in DC, that huge jumble of syllables that you were saying before, the District New Music Coalition, and we still work together constantly. They're like my favorite colleagues. So there is, in music composition, it might seem like the solitary job out of all of music. We're not, technically always performing with other people. We're not conducting large ensembles, but we have to know people because those are the people who are going to play our music, especially absent like a national recognition as you as a composer. Not everyone can be John Williams, who can just snap his fingers and there be the LA Philharmonic. You have to know people. So that's a key thing that I was very happy to have done. What I wish I had done, quite frankly, is this right here, because I was I'll admit that I was very lost after my doctoral program finished up. It took me about a good year before I kind of really got some good footing in as a career. Because yes, I was an adjunct at a nearby college for that first year, but it was small scale, and then finally it kind of it yielded other things down the line. But for that first year, it was tough. So that's one thing I wish I would have done was go to more discussions about frank discussions about what happens after your doctoral program. And one thing that I will mention, and I do not mean this with any ill will whatsoever, it's just a kind of the nature of the beast, is that a lot of my favorite composition teachers that I've had throughout the years, for better or worse, were all on kind of like the end of their careers a little bit, and they got their positions in a very different time than I'm getting my position. So just by sheer fact of where they're coming from, it was always very difficult for them to give me advice about how to apply for jobs in the 21st century, because they didn't come from it from that angle. So going out, especially and finding people like Joshua, for instance, someone who's on the younger side, who has been doing this for a while in this particular job market is invaluable because they've been in the thick of it and they've learned how to navigate it.
Wow. Yeah. To you, Josh, what's something that you're glad you did during your PhD or right after or leading to your job now? And what's something you wish you'd done differently?
Yeah. Well, first, just to follow up with something Bradley was saying, there
Sure.
was, yeah, I think talking to younger generations is really important. This is actually a conversation that I've been having with people at conferences probably since my master's degree. And it's staggering just how many people aren't having this conversation. So I think it's awesome, Emerson, that you started this talk even. And I've talked with people that have done their doctorates at state schools, Ivy League schools, you name it. And the professors with whom they're studying don't want to have this conversation with them. So, and in some ways it's understandable because as Bradley was saying, they got their jobs in a very different time. So it's a little bit difficult for them to have this conversation. So as much as we as a academic community, whether or not we're in the arts or sciences, can, learn from each other, I think that's a really important thing. As far as something that I'm really glad I did during my doctorate is adjunct. I'm very glad that I did that. As I alluded to a moment ago, there were even people that didn't want me to do it. They wanted me to focus on my studies. They wanted me to focus on my compositions, all of which are good things and all of which you do need to focus on. If you have like failing grades in your doctorate, or you don't have any research or creative activity to show, that's problematic. But assuming you're doing those things, you also need to have the teaching experience. I'm glad that I did that for the practical reason of it making me more marketable on the other end of my doctorate, but I'm also glad that I did it because it just honestly gave me a taste of actually doing the job. If you think about it, academia is kind of this backwards system where you spend over 10 years getting certified to do something that you've never actually done, so you don't know if you even like it. And there are people, and it's not surprising, there are people that go out and they get jobs teaching, and then they find out, oh, I actually don't want to do this. I actually don't like to do this thing. I fell in love with my science. I fell in love with my art. I fell in love with this thing. I don't really like working with students or whatever the case may be. So I'm glad that I did it because it made me more marketable. It also gave me a window into this is what the profession actually is. As much as we spend a ton of time in grad school and it becomes our entire world, but it's a very different experience being on the other end of things. Something I wish that I would have done or done differently, I don't know if it would have worked, but I somehow wish I could have magically found a way to not be stressed. Your mental health and your personal lives are way more important. I was like super focused on what I was doing to the point that it might have been unhealthy mentally. I was adjuncting at three colleges. I had a church job. I worked IT at the University of Oklahoma. I was working on my doctorate. Meanwhile, I'm also composing and trying to get into conferences. And it just has the potential to wreak all sorts of havoc on your mental health and your personal lives. So as much as possible, I know it seems impossible because here we are saying like, oh, we need to do your doctorate and you need to do research and you need to go to conferences and you also need to get adjunct teaching. And the list gets so long that you think, well, something's got to give. But hopefully the thing that won't give out is your personal life and your mental health. I love the job that I have now, and I'm very grateful that I have it. It's not the most important thing in my life. So if I could go back, I would find a way to chill out a little bit and actually try to enjoy the time, enjoy the people, and have a better work-life balance.
Wow.
I kind of want to echo exactly what Joshua just said there when it comes to your the work-life balance, because you're exactly right. It's a lot. For me, my burnout, because I will fully admit that I got burned out. Didn't happen until after I graduated. When I was working those multiple adjunct positions in a bunch of different places, because I'm not sure if you can echo this, Joshua, or not, but like one of the issues is, you're working at 3 schools, teaching, 5 classes, 7 private students at 3 universities, driving a bunch of different places, applying to get into conferences, going to rehearsals, and then doing this and that. And then, but the thing that it gets you, at least the thing that got me eventually, was like that also nagging feeling that I could be doing more. And that was always
I still have that.
Yeah, exactly. I will just say to whoever might be watching this is like, that is a thought that can be destructive, where you're working constantly, giving up your personal life for this career that you want so desperately. And then that same thought of like, but you could be doing more. You could have like, worked that Sunday instead of like, watching 30 minutes of a TV show you wanted to watch. Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, as much as possible, I encourage people to, whatever works for you. What worked for me is I implemented, eventually I got to a point where I implemented a clock out time each day. That's one of the advantages of having a regular job, is that there's a, 5 o'clock, you clock out. So, the time varied. It might have been 8 o'clock at night, it might have been 9 o'clock at night, whatever it was. But to try and have a point where if I'm lying in bed at 10 o'clock at night, and something pops into my head, I just say, no, I'm not going to deal with that. Another huge help was that I actually implemented a sort of Sabbath mentality, where I just took one day off a week and did absolutely nothing related to work. And that my mental health improved exponentially.
Yeah. Same thing as I did the exact same thing, was, clock out at night. I took Sundays off. 1,000 times better. Sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. That's okay. But I realized, there were points in my doctorate where taking a day off just wasn't an option. And, but as much as you can, try to do that.
Wow. This is great. Yeah, usually I ask the question about mental health as my Q&A part, but yeah, so
There's always more to say about that. So if you have more
do you want to keep going on
Yeah.
that? We could keep going
no,
on.
whichever.
No, I was going to ask even more specifically, like a targeted mental health question.
Yeah,
Like,
go ahead.
what was it like right after you passed because I've heard it can be weird just right after you pass the defense. And like, what was that like for each of you? I guess just I don't know, we can stick with Josh and then Bradley.
The defense actually was kind of stressful, because as soon as I finished the defense, they came out and my main professor came out and shook my hand and referred to me as Dr. Tomlinson, but then handed me a piece of paper and said, this has to be turned in by 5 o'clock. And it was in an office across the campus, and it was 4:30. So that was a little stressful, actually. I mean, I felt relief. I know some people go through some sort of kind of blues type of a feeling, but for me, I mean, I finished my master's degree ready to teach. Like, I felt in my heart. I mean, there might have been things that I needed to learn still, but I felt like I'm ready to do this job. So there were very good things about my doctorate, but I was ready for it to be done. I needed to get it done so I could get the thing at the other end that I ultimately wanted. So I felt a huge amount of relief. I've heard of people that have felt a little bit of blues, partly because it's true that at the end of your doctorate, or at least it was maybe true for me, that's the most you will ever know about your field. Because after that, it gets narrower and narrower. It's like right now, my job is I show up and I teach, and I even teach the same classes every year. So,
Right.
it's not like I'm expand. I mean, now you might find new things to add in and, switch things around, but like, if you ask me a question about like Dufy right now, I wouldn't be able to answer it, so there's a little bit of that. I've heard of people that have felt blues, and I've heard of people that have felt fear because it's finally over and now they're in the job market. But for me, at least, I felt relief.
How about you, Bradley?
Yeah, so I defended my dissertation. That wasn't as stressful as like just the comprehensive exams. That was stressful because it was like a whole weekend full of like, look at this score, who wrote it, and tell me everything you know about it. That was stressful. So nothing but relief after that. After the dissertation, though, almost exactly what Joshua just mentioned, maybe with a couple of caveats, which is after you get done, and everyone does the exact same thing, which is, it might sound cliche, but it still feels good, is that your primary teacher walks out, calls you doctor, shakes your hand, and is like, yeah, you feel good about yourself. So I wasn't so much relieved as much as I just felt proud that, I had the thing that I've been trying to get for so long. One difference between me and Joshua, I think, though, is that I went straight through. I did undergraduate, master's degree, and doctoral program. So like it was literally a little bit over a decade's worth of higher education, like streamlined directly through my 20s. And so like that was just like the exclamation point at the end of like my educational road that started with kindergarten and ended, well, preschool actually, and ended with doctoral program. So it was quite literally a world that I had never been in before. So in the immediate time, it was pride and it was relief. And then really once that semester really ended and once I, graduated, walked, got my degree, and then did not get any job offers, that's when the stress started sinking in. And I wouldn't necessarily say it was fear or anything like that, because like I mentioned before, I always knew that push comes to shove, and if it comes to my livelihood, there's plenty of other jobs in the world that I could get, because I had made sure to like get those degrees and those certifications and all that good stuff, and make sure that I knew how to do something other than just, write a good tune. But in the immediate aftermath, I had no offers for a full-time gig, and I was teaching one class at a nearby university, and that was stressful. So that's really how I felt afterwards. Once it sunk in, that I had nothing really coming up in that next semester, and also I really enjoyed school. I was someone who just learned and wanted to, learn from other people who knew better than myself. And not having that anymore, and kind of learning how to, do it yourself, took some time. But yeah, it was a lot of stress in that immediate aftermath. But once I got my footing, that took off. That pulled away quite a bit. But I have heard of other friends of mine who like were like immediately like, like you said, fearful and scared and like being like, well, what now then? So I mean, so it can be tough. But same thing Joshua just said as well when it comes to just the academic side of things. He's right. It's like you never know as much about music right after that the comprehensive exams and that dissertation, because like you said, you teach very targeted courses once you get out. So there was no real fear from like the academic side of things. All of my fear came from, or I should say stress came from like, just the job search in general. So long story short, pride, then fear.
And along Bradley's comment of feeling proud of yourself, is that a lot of people, it sounds like Bradley as well, myself, and I would encourage you to have fun with you as much as possible. Enjoy actually, because the fun thing about your dissertation defense is that you know the most in that room about that topic. So the part of the fun there is that you're kind of getting to flex your muscles, as it were. So, let yourself enjoy the process, and certainly gravitate more toward feeling proud of yourself or feeling the relief when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. When you're defending your dissertation, I always just I liked to think about it as if, these people came to hear me talk about my research. And like you said, no one in this world knows more about what I'm doing than me right here. And there's very few times in your career prior to that point that you can say that. So yeah, revel in it.
I'm curious of other questions you guys, Emerson and Lorena, might have, especially if there's anything that we can be useful to Lorena. But did you have other questions for us, Emerson?
I don't know. One that came to my mind was just when you're in this after period, like thinking about how to get a teaching job, was there like a feeling of like were you able to see you're working on that as a creative work, or was there a lull in your ability to be creative? Because the doctorate has that time where it's like you need to be writing, and then it's like now you're just needing to get a job and money, and like were you guys able to keep creating in a way that you wanted to, or did that have to take a backseat or change how you thought of it? Or
I actually was able to I kept creating. In fact, I would probably argue that I created more once I graduated. There was more time for it. There was probably the only lull that ever really happened in my writing happened within like the past year for reasons unrelated to my career as other things. But yeah, when I graduated, because again, like I mentioned, that Washington D.C. has a pretty active new music community, and because I knew some of the people in the field, and because I was able to start that program with my friends, District New Music Coalition, I knew people, and they were like, and people who would like want to play the music that I was writing. So I would say, yeah. In terms of the job market, there was stress, but in terms of my creative output, if anything, it went up.
okay.
I would say for each person, it's going to be different. So, it all depends on how much time you need to do things, whether that's creative activity or research. There are a lot of things about the job application process that you can streamline. So hopefully, keep all of your cover letters, keep all of your CVs, keep all of your, so that there comes a point where you're tailoring all of your job applications, but they hopefully start to take less and less time. So I didn't find that it did take away from creative time, certainly, but it wasn't draining it wasn't mentally as draining as I thought it would be. Teaching has been, but that's another thing. But yeah, no, I think it just depends on the person.
Just to follow up with something Joshua just mentioned, because you're exactly right, teaching can cut into a lot of it, but let me know if you disagree with this or not, Joshua, but like one thing I found was like whenever I was teaching classes for the first time, most of my my thought processes went into like being creative and how am I presenting the material, how am I putting this together. So in my career, I've taught probably 12 to 15 like unique courses where I had to like prep that class. But generally, after I've taught it once, like the load in terms of like how much of my time it takes to teach that course per semester reduces drastically. So I'll give you, for instance, first semester when COVID hit that fall semester, I was teaching 5 new preps, which is a fancy way of saying new classes that I'd never taught before that I was prepping day to day. And I didn't do any composing that semester. There was no way I was going to be able to. 5 new preps is a lot for anybody. But then I had those classes under my belt. I knew how to teach them. And like when I taught them again, yes, they're still grading. Yes, there's all that, but it didn't take nearly the same amount of time. So to put a pin in that, when you're teaching something for the first time, yeah, feel free to devote time to teaching that class as well as possible, and just know that the next few times you teach it, the less time you have to like really dig into it. You'll still have to like work with students and like answer their emails and talk with them and all of that stuff, but your actual day-to-day classes are set, and you just have to make tweaks depending on like new advances in the field. Or like one thing I would have to do is I would update every semester the music I was using to like more contemporary to what the students were listening to that year, something like that. But it was never the same as like that first time I taught it, because that would take a lot of time per week.
Yeah, I mean that is true. The first time you teach something, it's more time consuming. And I will say, as far as your research or creative activity, it's still important to have stuff that you're currently doing, but that's not in your portfolio at that point. So anyway, I'm really curious to get to if there's a way that we can be helpful to Lorena, because I know here we are talking about a bunch of music stuff, and I just don't know like if we're being helpful at all.
This has been plenty helpful in terms of like career trajectories, and like I never thought to look for like adjunct positions, for example. One thing I was wondering that I guess like I have to do like scientific publications, write papers. I'm wondering if when you got to your positions as academics, was there a pressure to keep producing your own original content? Or at that point, it's like you're teaching, it's okay.
I'm sorry, say that one more time. Your own original content, or what was the last part?
Or like, is it okay not to do as much because you're teaching?
Okay. So in your world, it might not need to be, I mean, I know there's original research, but there's also a more of a communal atmosphere, I think, right? Like presenting papers or posters together. So it might not be as imperative in the sciences that it, you know, like in our world, it's, yeah, this is my piece of music and it got accepted into this thing. But if you're a part of a team, a research team that is getting accepted or published, I also know there's a little bit of a hierarchy, right? So publishing is a really big deal, but even presenting posters matters. So I would say as much as you can be doing research and you know, be a part of research teams that are presenting posters. The general hierarchy in academia is that the most impressive is international. The least impressive, but still good, is at your own university. And then everything else in between. So regional, national, international sort of thing. But pretty much anything that you can have along those lines is good for you. As far as your teaching goes, I would say as much as you could diversify your teaching, you know, so even if there's a field of science that you know full well it's not your area of expertise, but you can find an adjunct job at a nearby community college doing it, that looks really, really good for you. The way to think of it is that you know, every time you get hired by a college, that's basically people approving of you. Right. So if a search committee goes down your CV and they see, oh, she was hired at this college and this college and this college, then, you know, basically she's already gotten through, these people liked her well enough, you know, she must be doing a good enough job sort of thing. But I think, especially in the sciences, from what I've heard, people tend to steer away from, oh, that's not my area. It's like, you know, I'm in astronomy. There's no way I could teach a biology class. You're smart enough at your level that you can teach an undergraduate biology class. I'm pretty sure of it. So don't talk yourself out of not applying to those jobs, you know, adjuncting a biology class just because it's not exactly your area. Because a lot of times the way that universities actually work, you might be surprised actually, especially smaller colleges and universities. When it comes down to the wire and they need someone to teach the class, they might very well put you in a biology class, even though you don't have a biology degree. So yeah, I'd say, you know, get on research teams, present posters, do all those things to be active, both as a scholar and as a teacher.
Yeah, and to add to what he just mentioned, yes, diversifying your teaching portfolio is huge. Again, especially for us for music composition, we can be pigeonholed as like, oh, you teach the theory or all skills track. It's like, well, yeah, but all the other things as well. But also to your question of like, you know, are you expected to continue with your scholarly endeavors? Obviously, you know, being in music, I can't totally speak for other fields. It's difficult to kind of know what is going on there, but I can say that it does depend on, number one, what type of school you're at, and number two, what type of position you have. So are you at a research university? Then you're going to be doing a lot of research. Are you at a little liberal arts college? You're going to be doing a lot of teaching. And sometimes, depending on your type of position, they might have a lot of less teaching for you to do because they specifically want you to do research. I know there are some situations where they'll have professors on, because they'll have professors on faculty that do the bare amount of teaching because they're there to do research, essentially. And then on the other end of it, I have actually a friend who recently is leaving his position because that position did not allow him to do any like outside work that he wanted to do, because it was just so much teaching and administrative work to do that he wasn't able to get any of his other stuff done. So he was like, this is just not fulfilling for me, so I'm going to bow out. And the reason it was like that is because he had what we call a term position. It wasn't a tenured track or a tenured position. It was term, which basically just means they re-up every year. So tenure just means that you've been there for long enough and you've jumped through their very particular hoops, and now they can't fire you any longer. There's more to it than that, but that's essentially what tenure is. But in his position, they literally sit you down on orientation and they say, you're here to teach this number of classes. Technically, nothing in your contract says that you have to do any research. We leave it up to the individual departments to say whether or not they'll fire you if you don't do any research. Like literally, they sat me down and told me that. I was like, cool, great, wonderful. So it really just depends. So like if you get that tenure track position, more than likely they're going to be judging you specifically on like, number one, you're teaching, yes, but also what is your scholarly output. And a lot of times I'll have specific things you're supposed to do, like, paper in national journal, presentation at regional or international or national event, blah, blah, blah. And you just check mark those off. But some positions, they'll say you're here to teach and that's what you're going to do, and do administrative work. And everything else you do outside of that is just up to you. So, yeah, I know no one likes that answer of it depends, but it kind of does.
Well, and along those lines, I'm curious, Lorena, what is your leaning? Is it more toward teaching or is it more toward research?
Personally, I prefer to do research, but my like experience is seeing the professors who've taught me, and some of them look like they're not doing as much research anymore. So I was curious, like, what actually happens once you get to that point,
Or do you even want to stay in academia? Because a lot of people with your degree don't even stay.
I'm like kind of in between things. I know like a lot of people leave and make a lot of money in data science, but I still really do like physics and astronomy, so kind of caught in between right now.
What I would say along those lines is, so yeah, trying to find people that have, because I know even at UNF, which is a regional school, we have some scientists on faculty that are on 12-month research, on research contracts. So the higher up you go, especially if you're the tier 1 research schools, the more that might be a likelihood. So trying to reach out to them to see what they did. I was fortunate that I actually gave guitar lessons to a couple of scientists back in Oklahoma. So this is what I learned from them. They were the ones that really told me about, the postdoctoral fellowships and things like that. And I was giving guitar lessons to the wife, and she was PhD engineering of some type, ended up going into more administrative work. She did 1 postdoctoral fellowship. Her husband did 2 postdoctoral fellowships, and he was, I think, all research. So actually in the sciences, I was surprised to learn it's not even uncommon to do more than 1 postdoctoral fellowship. So if you're really interested in research, I mean, my world's mostly teaching, so my advice, take with a grain of salt, but reach out to some of those people that, especially at tier 1 schools, to see what they might recommend. The other thing I would say is, I don't know if you all are familiar with the Job Wiki. Have you seen the job wiki? Here, is it possible for me to screen share, or I can?
Possibly, yeah. I'm gonna have to go at 7:15 though.
Okay, here, I'm just gonna send you this link real quick then in the chat. Now this is the
Excellent.
one, I have it saved to,
Let me see if I might be able to get you to share real quick.
I have
it
it
would be-
saved to music theory, but go ahead and click on it
Here,
because
you can share now. So why don't you share just so that it's on the video,
okay.
so everyone can see what it looks like.
So I have it saved to music theory, and here it is up here in my little toolbar with job wiki. But you can search anything that you want, even from 2-3 years ago. Bradley also mentioned higheredjobs.com. I'm on that as well. And the great thing about Higher Ed Jobs is that you can tailor it to, it can be
Right.
administrative jobs, it can be whatever your field
You
is.
can create a job agent and it'll email you whenever jobs come open of that specific type.
Exactly. So here, if I were to like click on, literally, if I wanted to look at jobs from 2 or 4 years ago, and it shows me recent content, and like a wiki, anybody can add to this and, edit it. So I would recommend keep an eye on this also for postdoctoral fellowships, because they do post those as well. One piece of advice that I was given in my master's degree that I have lived by, and I will tell you because it saved me a lot of mental health. Whenever you see a job or postdoctoral, whatever, or even conference that you apply to, as soon as you apply to it, forget about it. Don't let yourself, because you will lose sleep, thinking about, oh,
Yeah.
that's my dream job, that's my whatever. But
that times 10 have no connection to it whatsoever. Yeah, 100%.
So like if I were to apply to this job at Belmont University, while I'm applying to it, it's going to be like the number one thing on my mind. I'm reading every little detail of what they want. But as soon as I click the submit button, I just forget about it. But keep an eye on this academic job wiki. I have heard that on the job wiki, there is also a chat, and I would highly recommend to not read it. As a matter of fact, I've never even gone and looked for it, because and every time I go to a conference, people will talk about the academic job wiki, and it's never put anyone in a good mood. So use it, read it, use it to find job offers and to find postdoctoral fellowship offers. Apply to those jobs, and then otherwise forget about it.
So I'd heard about that before. I've looked through it a little bit, but I've been to a bunch of conferences. I've never heard anyone talk about it. So what conference specifically? I'm curious. Did they talk a lot about the academic jobs wiki? Are we talking like SMT?
Oh no, I mean it's usually I don't have a specific one. It's just usually, if you go to enough conferences or festivals or anything, inevitably, after presentations, people are going to go out for drinks, and it's a really, whether you're in the arts or sciences, it's a really tough gig right now, especially if you're in the arts and especially if you're in the humanities. No, it's not really a specific one. It's just more generally when people go out for drinks and start to talk about it. And inevitably what happens is, like, because people will post like who got the job or something, and
Oh yeah, okay. That I have been in those conversations before.
Yeah, so just protect your mental health as much as possible.
Well, thank you guys so much.
Yeah.
I love the bonus content, was maybe the best part. This was awesome. Thank you. Yeah, it's great to connect with you, Josh, and you, Bradley. I mean, Bradley, we went to school together, and Josh, we both studied with Ed Jacobs. So it's great to see you guys. Maybe we'll connect again. Maybe our paths will cross.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lorena, for hopping on. I
Yeah,
gotta head out, but it's awesome. What?
One quick thing, if any of your colleagues like want to reach out to me at all, just like give my email address and I'll answer any emails they have.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can definitely do that. And Josh, you wanted a recording of this, and I'll totally get that to you.
Sure, and I'm happy to stay in touch too. So
yeah, and the honorariums will go out soon. We're gonna you know how it is. It could be like a month, but yeah.
Yeah.
So anyways, see you guys.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Bye.